Live from Washington, this is BBC News. The U.S. government narrowly avoids a shutdown after the Senate agrees to move forward with a funding package. Democrats raised the alarm after the FBI's raid on an election hub at the center of President Trump's claims of election fraud in 2020. The Trump administration promises to make ICE operations in Minneapolis safer. The UN urges Iran and the U.S. de-escalate tensions. That's as President Trump warns that time is running out in Tehran. Plus, the UK Prime Minister secures visa-free travel for British tourists after a one-on-one with President Xi in Beijing. Hello, I'm Carl Nassman. Welcome to the program. We begin with some breaking news right here in Washington. The BBC's media partner, CBS, reporting that the Senate has reached an agreement to move forward with a government funding package while negotiations continue over reforms to immigration enforcement. That's in the wake of the shootings in Minneapolis the last 3 weeks. A Democrat told CBS that the deal includes removing a bill to fund the Department of Homeland Security, which oversees ICE, from a broader package of 6 spending bills that cover other parts of the government. That's while extending funding for DHS at current levels for 2 weeks. As that news broke the last hour, I spoke to our CBS News congressional correspondent, Nicole Killion, who walked us through what's in that deal.
Yeah, well, obviously the details are still emerging, but this is something that Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer had been pushing for several days now, encouraging that this Department of Homeland Security funding bill be split from other appropriations measures. Right now, there are 6 in all, including DHS, that are needed to fully fund the government. Some of those bills had already passed, but there were 6 that remained. And so basically, they are all coupled together. So in splitting off the Department of Homeland Security funding, this will enable the Senate to vote on bills to fund various parts of the government, whether that's the Defense Department or the Labor Department, the Treasury Department, all critical agencies, and also allow that funding for the Department of Homeland Security to continue, but just on a short-term basis for 2 weeks. And that in that time period, the hope is that lawmakers can negotiate and rewrite that bill a bit to address ICE's conduct in light of the deadly shooting incidents that we saw earlier this month in Minnesota. Obviously, that has raised a lot of concerns, both on the part of Republicans and Democrats, given that 2 American citizens were killed. And so Democrats in particular have been calling for various reforms to ICE and immigration enforcement. For instance, they believe that these agents shouldn't wear masks, that there should not be these roving patrols. There needs to be a uniform code of conduct in how these agents operate. So those are some of the reforms that Democrats are pushing for and that they're hoping to negotiate with Republicans on. So having this 2-week period to continue Department of Homeland Security funding and try to secure those reforms is basically what is coming out of these negotiations, while at the same time funding other federal agencies in full. That is the agreement that appears to be on the horizon. We did see Truth Social post from President Trump a short time ago saying that he is continuing to work very diligently to ensure that the government is fully funded and encouraging both Republican and Democratic senators to vote yes on this deal.
Yeah, so instead of a 30-hour or so ticking clock, it's now up to 2 weeks. And just briefly, Nicole, what's the sense there on Capitol Hill that Republicans and Democrats can agree to some of those measures you mentioned that would reform the way that ICE agents, for example, operate out in the field?
Yeah, well, obviously there are very different perspectives in terms of how to reform the agency. And keep in mind, ICE has already secured a significant amount of funding from the Republican mega bill that the president often refers to as the big, beautiful bill that was passed last summer here in Congress. So they already have quite a large operating budget. So what we're really talking about within the context of this DHS DHS funding bill is maybe about $10 billion additional dollars. Still, that being said, many Republican lawmakers that we have talked to say that they are open to some reforms, but they do caution that they feel that Democrats should concede a little bit when it comes to, for instance, sanctuary city policies. They believe that that has contributed to some of the issues and challenges that we have seen in this country around immigration enforcement. So whether or not Republicans start putting forward additional asks is something that we will be watching. But certainly there is a shared agreement that we don't want to see any more American citizens killed, and certainly a bipartisan agreement that the temperature needs to be lowered, broadly speaking, but also on the part of ICE as they continue to carry out their duties throughout the country.
Yeah, Nicole Killian there following that, the killings of Minneapolis residents Alex Pretty and Brene Good. In a news conference that was light on details, he says he wants common sense cooperation that allows us to draw down the number of people we have here. And while he says ICE and Border Patrol officers are working in a challenging environment, he insists unprofessional behavior will be dealt with.
We will conduct targeted enforcement operations. Targeted. What we've done for decades. When we hit the streets, we know exactly who we're looking for. Good idea where we may find them. Nothing's ever perfect, and anything can be improved on. And what we've been working on is making this operation safer, more efficient, by the book. The mission is going to improve because of the changes we're making internally.
Meanwhile, the Minneapolis mayor, Jacob Frey, laid out what's at stake in his city.
We are on the front lines of a very important battle. And it's important that we aren't silenced, that we aren't put down. This is not a time to bend our heads in despair or out of fear that we may be next, because if we do not speak up, if we do not step out, it will be your city that is next.
Well, Democrats in the U.S. are sounding the alarm over an FBI raid of a local elections office in Fulton County, Georgia. County officials there say the government's warrant sought records related to the 2020 election. The FBI didn't respond to the BBC's request for comment. It comes after the U.S. Justice Department sued Fulton County back in December, seeking records similar to what the FBI seized on Wednesday. Georgia and Fulton County in particular were a major focus of Donald Trump's efforts to overturn the 2020 election, which included multiple lawsuits and claims of widespread voter fraud in states that he lost. Numerous courts rejected legal challenges and claims made by him and his allies. Complicating matters, the U.S. Director of National Intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard, was spotted on the scene there. The Wall Street Journal is reporting on Thursday that she's spent months leading an effort to find evidence of fraud in the 2020 election. The UN is calling for diplomacy to resolve spiraling tensions between Iran and the United States after President Trump warned that time was running out for the country to negotiate a deal on its nuclear program. 10 American warships are now in the region. It's part of what Mr. Trump described as a massive armada. Iran says it's ready to respond to any aggression. Thousands of people have been killed in recent weeks as the Iranian authorities respond to protests in cities across the country with a brutal crackdown. The numbers of those who have died and been injured are not easy to estimate because of an ongoing internet blackout there in Iran. Well, joining me live is Matthew Bunn, professor of practice of energy, national security, and foreign policy at the Harvard Kennedy School. It's great to have you here because so much of the focus before, in terms of these threats from the president, was on the protesters. Now it seems to have shifted back to Iran's nuclear program. For clarity's sake, I guess, is it possible, what do we know about the current state of Iran's nuclear program?
Well, Iran's program was set back a great deal by the strikes this past summer, but there's still a lot of uncertainty about whether there are unaccounted for stocks of uranium enrichment centrifuges or parts for them, or even nuclear material itself. And in recent days, there has been new activity at some of the deep tunnels that are near the Esfahan uranium complex. It does appear there's some activity related to trying to recover from the strikes this past summer.
Yeah, and you know, it's obviously difficult to know, a lot of this kind of shrouded in secrecy, but clearly there was damage done to those sites that were hit by the bombs. You know, are there other sites in Iran where, you know, crucial material is held? Is it possible that right now, you know, Iran may be scrambling to get that program back on track?
Well, the main enrichment sites are out of action. They're definitely not being used now. If I had to guess, if Iran was going to rebuild its program, it would probably do it elsewhere at new places. It does have two locations that are nuclear related and are more deeply buried than the deeply buried site at Fordow that was destroyed. And so it's quite possible that there is activity at those sites. The chief of the International Atomic Energy Agency has been going back and forth with Iran because they don't really know where all the enriched uranium that Iran produced before the strikes now is. They think it probably wasn't removed, but it's hard to know whether some of it might have been removed to other locations where it could be further enriched before the strikes occurred.
You know, let's say, and this is just a hypothetical, given the military threats against Iran, say the regime were to come out and say, look, you know, we actually do have a nuclear bomb. Is that a claim that could be easily verified right now, given, you know, there's no inspectors in the country?
Probably not, and I don't think they'll make such a claim. I think they are a decent ways away, and it's hard for me to understand the President Trump's argument that time is running out. He did set back the program with the American strikes and the Israeli strikes quite substantially. I do think there is an option if for diplomacy to resolve this if Trump stops making the extreme demand of zero enrichment in Iran, which is neither necessary because even if they agreed to it, they could restart enrichment fairly rapidly, nor is it negotiable with the Iranians. It would be a huge capitulation on their part. I think it appears that the Iranian foreign minister is headed for Turkey, which is trying to mediate between between the United States and Iran. I think there may still be an option, if not for a detailed deal like the one Trump pulled out of, at least for a tacit understanding where the United States would say, in essence, don't do X and Y or we'll hit you. And the Iranians would grumpily go along.
Matthew Dunn, a professor of practice of energy, national security, and foreign policy there at the Harvard Kennedy School. We appreciate your time. Really interesting to get your perspective.
Thank you very much. Great to be here.
Around the world and across the UK, this is BBC News. You're live with BBC News. The British Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer has agreed a series of deals with China, which he says will make it easier for British businesses to expand and in turn boost growth in the UK. British citizens will no longer need a visa to visit China if their trip is under 30 days. The UK pharmaceutical giant AstraZeneca announced a further £11 billion investment in China until 2030. After talks on Thursday with President Xi Jinping, Sir Keir says the relationship between the two countries is in a good, strong place. From Beijing, here is our political editor, Chris Mason.
The Prime Minister and the President, smiles intended to convince you of what they see as the merits of warming up the relationship between the UK and China.
You've publicly said that China is an opportunity and that dealing with China is not a choice but a necessity. I commend these words.
That, diplomacy China style. This, ceremony China style. The Prime Minister later in the company of China's second highest ranking official and turning heads, with all eyes on the changing relationship with Beijing.
Prime Minister, your impressions of President Xi, is he someone you can do business with?
Yes, we had a very good, productive session with real concrete outcomes, and it was a real strengthening of the relationship, and a lot of the discussion was about how we open up access for those opportunities, focusing, as I always do, on how is this going to be delivered back in the United Kingdom, how does it benefit people back at home. And we made some really good progress on tariffs for whisky, on visa-free travel to China.
The government wants to make greetings and meetings like this easier. The new visa deal is promised as soon as possible, but with no confirmed start date. The tariff or import tax China charges on whisky will fall from 10 to 5%.
Now, in an unstable world, agreements and partnerships of the nature of we have seen here today create the stability that businesses thrive upon. It is a springboard into a future with far more action to come.
This deal signing China style, but this is document swapping and handshaking the Conservatives say is a big mistake.
Keir Starmer has gone to Beijing to kowtow to President Xi in the hope he gets a few economic crumbs from President Xi's table to make up for the catastrophic handling of the economy that he and Rachel Reeves have unleashed.
The Prime Minister's critics argue he is naive given China's extensive spying and its failures over human rights.
How forcefully did you raise issues such as the jailing of the pro-democracy campaigner Jimmy Lai, the treatment of the Uyghurs, for instance?
Well, we raised those issues as you would expect. Part of the rationale for engagement is to make sure that we can both seize the opportunities that are available, which is what we've done, but also have a mature discussion about issues that we disagree on.
Were they listening on that, you think?
Yes, we did have a respectful discussion about that.
The questions now in this reset relationship, the extent to which it makes a difference you can feel, and whether there could be a return date, the Chinese president visiting Britain, it's not being ruled out. Chris Mason, BBC News in Beijing.
Ravi Agrawal is the editor-in-chief of Foreign Policy magazine. He told me that diplomatic uncertainty has prompted the UK Prime Minister to make that trip.
I think the United Kingdom, like many other countries now, has realized that you need to diversify your friends. And there's one big friend on the other side of the world that many countries that had previously allied very closely with the United States had been forced to decouple from in a way. And now those countries are finding that they would be better off being friendly with China, opening up trade ties and trade routes as the United States becomes a more unreliable ally. In just the past month, we've had the leaders of Canada, Finland, South Korea all make trips to China, and that comes off the backs of many other leaders from other countries making similar trips to China with a realization that they need other friends.
Yeah, and what about China itself? You know, we can get to kind of the politics around this in terms of the Western countries, but, you know, what's in it for China? Is there a broader strategy to this meeting, or do you think this was simply about what was it, tariffs on whiskey and 30-day visas for British travelers?
Look, China would have much rather none of this needed to happen. In other words, for a variety of reasons, all of these countries had troubled relations with China, whether it's on the question of human rights, which was a big thing for the United Kingdom after the transition in Hong Kong, and a crackdown on some British citizens under an obscure national security law. But for many other countries, it was partly at the urging of the United States that there was a sort of bipolar system in the world. You're either on the US side or the China side when it comes to tech transfers or defense ties. And for a lot of those countries now, they're having to rethink those options. Now, your question was about China. China never wanted there to be this bipolar system. It kind of wanted it all. And now it's finding that countries are just much more open to go back to China to look for various ties and overlook some of the things they didn't like, such as human rights violations.
Yeah, and you mentioned this, bipolar world, this competition, I guess, between the U.S. and China, which in some ways has ramped up under President Trump, and in some ways, maybe has cooled a bit. But do you think that President Trump's policies, especially trade policies, have pushed some of these Western countries, Canada and the U.K., to maybe get a bit closer to China?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I'll give you the biggest example of all. I mean, you can talk about whiskey and things like that, but at a much more kind of an issue core to national security, think of electric vehicles. Canada reduced tariffs on electric vehicles, Chinese electric vehicles, which essentially these days are very big smartphones. I mean, if you've been in one of these Chinese EVs, it's full of technology. And, any member of the Western Five Eyes Alliance will tell you that there's a lot of chances for surveillance here. There could be Chinese malware in these cars and smartphones. Canada made the choice to allow these cars in for cheaper, with fewer tariffs, despite advice from the United States to not do so. Again, because it felt like, in as much as this is a risk, having the United States as your only option is a far bigger risk. Yeah. So we're in very new territory in that sense.
All right, let's take you live now to Washington, and this is the global premiere of Melania, the new film that is about, of course, the First Lady, Melania Trump. You see her there on the right, along with President Donald Trump. They're on the red carpet there outside the premiere, taking place at the Trump Kennedy Center in just a few minutes or so, and the president's been taking questions there. But this really is more about this film, about the First Lady, about the 20 days leading up to her husband's presidential inauguration last January. This was a film that Amazon reportedly paid $35 million in order to market, and it was produced by the First Lady herself. So that film premiering tonight, it will be in theaters, I believe, this weekend. Let's just listen in to what President Trump has to say.
Because I saw it 3 days ago for the first time. There's a great glamour, beautiful glamour, and you learn it's about the White House, it's about our country, and we need a little glamour. I like glamour.
What was it like having Nicki Minaj in the Oval Office?
Nicki Minaj is fantastic. She's a terrific person. She was so nice, and she understands, what we're doing with the Trump accounts. We're helping children grow up when they're 18 years old.
All right, yeah, the president there taking questions on the Trump accounts, on Nicki Minaj, who he had a friendly encounter with the other day to support those accounts, and other questions as well. But again, a night that's really more about the First Lady, Melania Trump, her film premiering here in Washington. Well, here in Washington, just like in much of the country, we're just digging out from the aftermath of Sunday's winter storm, and now there is more snow on the way. Meteorologists watching a large storm system developing. You see it there off the southeastern coast of the country. Winter storm watches have been issued for parts of northern Georgia, South Carolina, eastern Tennessee, North Carolina, and southern Virginia. Snowfall in those regions could reach up to 15 inches. That's 38 centimeters. This weekend's potential storm not expected to be as widespread or as long-lived as the previous one, but the areas due to be hit are being warned to prepare for what's being called a bomb cyclone. Extremely cold weather is expected to grip much of the eastern states as far south as southern Florida into early February. All right, we can go back now to the red carpet there at the Melania premiere in Washington, and President Trump, along with Melania Trump, they're taking questions. Let's just listen in briefly again to the president.
Good country in many ways, but it's different, and she's picked it up very easily. Speaks a lot of languages, very smart, understands what's happening, and really is a good influencer of me. Thank you.
Mr. President, you have a TV and film background. Did you have any input or any say on the creative direction? Yeah, on this one.
I would say.
Yeah, there we go. I think some kind words, it sounded like, for his wife, Melania Trump. And this is a film that was produced by the First Lady herself and will be in theaters starting on Saturday. People are looking forward to seeing that.